Imagine the government passes a law tomorrow that is, like, mathematically undeniably proven to save 1 million lives.
Okay, a completely guaranteed utopian outcome.
Right. It is a guaranteed outcome. But to achieve this result, they have to deliberately frame one completely innocent person for a terrible, heinous crime and execute them publicly.
Wow. Yeah, that is a heavy scenario.
It is, right.
Yeah.
But do you support it? Because if you ask most modern politicians or, even just regular folks on the street, many would quietly swallow hard and say yes.
You'd say it's just basic math.
Exactly. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. It's a tragic necessity.
And that right there is the classic utilitarian trap. We have been so conditioned to think of morality as like a spreadsheet.
Yeah, a simple cost-benefit analysis.
Right, where human lives are just data points to be tallied up and balanced out.
But what if I told you that framing that innocent person isn't just morally questionable? What if it is literally, logically, and mathematically impossible to justify?
It completely breaks the system.
It really does. What if the very act of doing that math destroys the foundational fabric of human reason?
That is a massive claim.
It is, and today we are undertaking a massive mission. We are going to explore how we actually figure out what is truly good for us as human beings.
Right, the bedrock stuff.
Exactly. How do we construct a fair society from scratch? And what actually gives the laws we live under their moral power to compel our obedience?
And our guide for this comprehensive journey is John Finnis's monumental philosophical text, Natural Law and Natural Rights.
And we're also including his crucial reflections from the 2011 postscript, right?
Yes, absolutely. This is a text that bridges a massive historical gap. I mean, Finnis manages to take the ancient foundational philosophy of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas.
Which can be incredibly dense.
It can be, but he weaves it seamlessly into the absolute cutting edge of modern analytical legal theory. It is brilliant.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to be clear for you listening. Whether you are trying to figure out your own personal life choices or, you're trying to critically dissect the justice system of a modern political state, this deep dive is going to provide you with a profound framework.
It really is like an architectural blueprint for human flourishing.
Exactly. We are not treating this like some dusty, esoteric textbook. We are looking for the invisible structural forces that govern our lives.
So before we can even begin to define what makes a specific law just or unjust, we have to step back.
Right. We have to ask a much more basic question. How do we even study a social institution like the law in the first place?
Because why not just open a law book, read the statutes, and say, well, there it is, that's the law.
Right. That seems like the easiest way to do it. But to understand why simply reading a statute isn't enough, we have to look closely at what Finnis was reacting against.
Yes. For a very long time, legal theory was heavily dominated by a school of thought known as legal positivism.
Okay, let's break that down for people.
Sure. So if you think of early theorists like Jeremy Bentham, John Austin, and later Hans Kelsen, their primary goal was to make the study of law highly scientific.
Like they wanted it to be as empirical as physics or chemistry.
Exactly. Completely stripped of all moral evaluation, all emotion, and all philosophical baggage.
They wanted this perfectly clean, sterile laboratory environment for studying society.
Right. And to do that, they tried to define law purely by its real elements, its observable empirical facts.
So no squishy moral stuff, just the facts.
Exactly. For John Austin, writing in the 19th century, a law was simply a command issued by a political superior, a sovereign, and backed up by a threat of violence or coercion.
So if the sovereign says do this and threatens to lock you in a cage if you don't, that is a law, full stop.
That was the idea, and later, Hans Kelsen refined this by defining law as a specific social technique of coercion.
Meaning the state just successfully monopolizes physical force to get people to behave a certain way.
Exactly.
Okay, but this definition has always bothered me. Let's test this out.
Go for it.
If I'm walking down an alley and a mafia boss steps out, points a gun at my head, and commands me to give him my wallet, under Austin's strict definition, he is a superior force issuing a command backed by a threat.
He certainly is.
So is that a law? Because intuitively, my brain screams that being robbed by the mafia is the exact opposite of a legal system.
It is a great point.
Defining law purely by coercion is like defining a hospital purely by the fact that they lock the doors and strap people to beds at night. It misses the entire point of the institution.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Yes, a hospital locks its doors sometimes, and yes, a legal system uses coercion.
But if you don't understand why the institution exists, like to heal people or to coordinate society, you have no idea what you are actually observing.
And that aligns perfectly with the critique that eventually broke early positivism. Later legal theorists, particularly H.L.A. Hart and Joseph Raz, recognized this glaring flaw.
They realized the mafia boss definition just wasn't cutting it.
Right. They improved upon Austin and Kelson by focusing on what they called the practical point of law.
The practical point, what does that mean exactly?
They realized you cannot understand the law just by looking at the guns and the prison cells. You have to look at its social function. The function of law is to guide human behavior and to resolve disputes authoritatively.
Which is obviously a huge step up from the mafia boss in an alley.
It is. But Finnis takes it a crucial revolutionary step further. He argues that Hart and Raz didn't go far enough.
Oh, really? How so?
Finnis states that you cannot accurately describe any social science, including law, without evaluating what is practically reasonable.
So we are bringing morality back into the laboratory.
Exactly. You cannot understand the point of a human institution without having some foundational understanding of what is actually good for human persons.
Because the descriptive sociology of law inherently requires moral philosophy.
It does, and this leads directly to Finnis's methodology, which he calls the central case, or the focal meaning.
I think this is a brilliant analytical tool just for everyday life. Let's explain how the central case works.
Sure. The idea of the central case is this. If you want to understand what a true legal system is, you shouldn't waste your time studying a corrupt, tyrannical regime where a dictator just uses arbitrary rules to oppress the peasantry.
Right, because that's a broken system.
Exactly. You have to study the best, most fully realized version of law. You must study law from the viewpoint of practical reasonableness.
It's like if an alien came to Earth and wanted to understand what water is, you wouldn't hand them a cup of stagnant, mosquito-infested mud from a swamp.
Right. That would give them a very skewed idea of water.
Yeah. I mean, technically the mud has H2O in it. It is a form of water, but it's a defective, watered-down, impure instance of the thing.
You would hand the alien a glass of pure, filtered H2O.
Exactly. That's the central case. A tyrannical regime has laws in a marginalized, muddy, defective sense. But to understand the institution of law descriptively, you must first understand its central, most rational case.
Precisely. You study the healthy organism to understand the diseased one, not the other way around.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
But when Finnis asserts that we must look at what is good for human nature to understand the law, he runs headfirst into one of the most famous roadblocks in all of Western philosophy.
Yes. David Hume. For anyone who has ever taken a Philosophy 101 class, you have probably been warned about the Eyes-ought fallacy.
Also known as Hume's guillotine.
Right. Hume, this Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, famously taught us that you cannot derive an ought meaning a moral duty to do something from an is a mere empirical fact of nature.
Just because something is a certain way doesn't mean it ought to be that way.
Exactly. I can observe a biological fact that big fish eat little fish. That is an is. I cannot then deduce the moral rule that big humans ought to eat little humans.
That would be a terrifying world.
It really would. So, if natural law is supposed to be based on human nature, how does Finnis survive Hume's guillotine? Doesn't the very phrase natural law imply we are looking at biology to find our morals?
What's fascinating here, and this often shocks critics of natural law, is that Finnis completely unequivocally agrees with David Hume on this point.
Wait, really? He agrees with Hume.
He does. Finnis argues that you absolutely cannot derive an ought from an is.
Then how does he defend natural law?
His crucial defense of the classical tradition, specifically Thomas Aquinas, is that true natural law does not make that illicit leap. It does not infer moral norms from biological, historical, or metaphysical facts.
Hold on. This goes against almost every popular conception of natural law I've ever heard. You hear pundits on TV all the time say, well, it's against human biology, therefore it's against natural law.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
You're telling me that is a fundamental misreading of the philosophy.
It is a massive misreading. And it's a misconception that was unfortunately perpetuated even by some later, lesser natural law theorists in the centuries after Aquinas.
Oh, so even the philosophers got it wrong sometimes.
They did. But Finnis meticulously clarifies this. He points out that the basic principles of right and wrong are underived.
Underived, meaning they don't come from anywhere else.
Right. They are not deduced from anything else. They are self-evident to human practical intelligence.
Okay, we need to unpack self-evident because people use that term just to mean obvious to me. which isn't what philosophers mean.
Correct. In philosophy, a self-evident truth isn't just something that happens to be obvious. It means a truth that doesn't rely on a deeper foundational premise to be proven.
It's the bottom floor of the building.
Exactly. It is grasped directly by intelligence. When you grasp that knowledge is a good thing to pursue, you aren't looking at a textbook on human neurobiology, noting the synaptic structures of the brain, and deducing a moral rule that humans ought to learn.
Right. Nobody does that in real life.
No, your intelligence is directly, immediately grasping that knowing the truth is inherently worthwhile. Natural law isn't about looking at the animal kingdom to see how humans should act.
It's about our intelligence.
Yes, it's about the unique capacity of human intelligence grasping what is inherently good and directing our will to participate in it.
So, if the foundation of law and morality isn't derived from physical nature, and it isn't just a list of arbitrary commands from a dictator, where does it actually come from?
It comes from grasping basic human goods.
That is the perfect logical bridge to our next major topic. We have to figure out what these inherent goods actually are.
And Finnis uses the good of knowledge as his prime example to demonstrate how this works.
Knowledge, okay.
Knowledge isn't just good because it helps you get a better job or because it helps an engineer build a sturdier bridge. Those are instrumental goods.
They are a means to an end.
Exactly. Knowledge is what the classical tradition calls a bonum honestum.
Let's ground that term, bonum honestum. That's a heavy Latin phrase. What does a modern bonum honestum look like?
It simply means a good that is inherently worthy, a good that is worth having purely for its own sake, regardless of what it produces. It has intrinsic value.
Okay, I can see that with knowledge.
And Finnis uses knowledge to show exactly what he means by a self-evident principle that requires no other proof. He points out that you can't logically prove that knowledge is good using some other foundational premise.
Why not?
Because the goodness of knowledge is the foundational premise of any argument you could possibly make. Any argument a skeptic makes against the value of knowledge actually destroys itself in real time.
Oh, I love this part. You basically trap the skeptic in a logical, inescapable box.
You really do.
Let's roleplay this. If I come to you, playing the cynical skeptic, and I say, listen, truth is an illusion. Knowledge isn't really a good thing. We are all just making it up as we go.
Okay, so you've made your skeptical claim.
Right. You don't have to defend knowledge with some long essay. You just have to ask me one question.
Exactly. I would just ask you, are you claiming that it is a good thing for us to know that your skeptical statement is true?
And I'm trapped. If I say yes, I am claiming that knowing the truth of skepticism is a valuable thing, which instantly proves that knowledge is a value.
And if you say no?
If I say no, then my statement doesn't matter and I'm just making meaningless noise. Skepticism about this basic value is entirely self-refuting.
It is a brilliant philosophical checkmate. So knowledge is securely established as a basic good.
But Finnis doesn't stop there. He comprehensively lists 7 basic forms of human good.
These are the fundamental aspects of human well-being, the invisible pillars that support everything we call flourishing.
Let's walk through these 7 goods, because I want you, listening, to really pay attention to this list. We are going to ask you to evaluate your own life against it shortly.
It's a very practical list.
The first basic good Finnis identifies is life.
And we must be precise here. By life, Finnis doesn't just mean biological survival, the mere beating of a heart in a comatose body.
It's more robust than that.
Much more. He means health, vitality, safety, freedom from pain, and crucially, the procreative transmission of life. It is the fundamental drive for self-preservation and the continuation of the human story.
Okay, life makes obvious sense. And we just established the second one, knowledge.
The pursuit of truth for its own sake, the sheer joy of finding out how the universe works.
The third one is play. And this is fascinating to me because a lot of highly rigid, puritanical moralists completely overlook play, treating it as just a frivolous waste of time.
But deep anthropologists and psychologists don't overlook it at all. Finnis defines play as excellence in performance for its own sake. It doesn't need an ulterior motive.
Okay, I have to pause and push back on this one. I really struggle with elevating play to the same foundational level as life or knowledge.
It does sound a bit counterintuitive at first.
Right. Like you're telling me that a guy who spends 5 hours a day mastering a video game or playing a pickup basketball game is participating in a basic human good that is objectively equal to a doctor curing a disease.
It's a vital pushback.
It just sounds like a recipe for a deeply unserious hedonistic society. How can play be a foundational pillar of morality?
Well, it forces us to define what makes a good basic. Why is play basic? Because it is irreducible.
Meaning you can't break it down into another motivation.
Yeah, exactly. Think about the basketball game, or a complex puzzle, or even a deep, engaging video game. When you are fully immersed in play, you aren't doing it to make money. You aren't doing it to survive.
You're just doing it.
You are doing it for the sheer excellence of the performance itself, the joy of execution. If you ask a child why they are building a sandcastle, they will look at you like you are crazy. The building is the point.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Finnis argues that a human life entirely devoid of play, a life of endless, gray, instrumental toil where every single action must have a productive purpose, is a tragically mutilated human life. It lacks a fundamental dimension of flourishing.
Okay, well, you put it that way. The dystopian gray life of endless toil. I can see why play is a necessary pillar to hold up the human spirit.
It absolutely is.
All right, moving on to number 4. Aesthetic experience. This is the appreciation of beauty.
And it could be found in the natural world, like staring at a breathtaking mountain range. Or it could be found in human creation, like listening to a symphony or looking at a painting.
It seems pretty closely related to play.
It is related, but it is distinct. Play involves your active performance. Aesthetic experience can be purely receptive. It is the internal recognition of form, harmony, and beauty.
Got it. The 5th good is sociability or friendship.
And this is a spectrum. It ranges from the most basic, baseline requirement of peace and harmony with your neighbors, just not being at war with the people around you.
Which is always nice.
Right. All the way up to the deepest, most intimate forms of friendship. And Finnis defines true friendship beautifully. It is acting for the sake of your friends' well-being and purposes, not just for what you can extract from them.
So it's not a transactional networking relationship.
Exactly not that.
Number 6 is practical reasonableness. This sounds incredibly dry, but is actually the engine of the whole system.
It really is the engine.
Yeah.
Practical reasonableness is the good of bringing your own intelligence to bear effectively on the problems of choosing your actions, shaping your character, and living authentically.
So it's about being in the driver's seat of your own life.
Yes. It's the internal harmony of your emotions and your intellect, and the external authenticity of your actions matching your inner values. It is the good of being a self-directed, rational agent rather than a slave to your impulses.
And finally, the 7th basic good is religion. Now, I know some listeners just tensed up.
That word carries a lot of baggage.
It really does.
Well,
When people hear religion in a philosophical context, they immediately think of specific, organized dogmas, steeples, offering plates, and guilt.
But Finnis is incredibly careful here to avoid that assumption. He does not mean a specific organized dogma. He defines religion in the broadest possible philosophical sense.
How broad are we talking?
It is the fundamental human search for harmony between yourself and the ultimate source of reality, the cosmos or the divine.
So it's the big questions.
Exactly. He points out that even an atheist existentialist like Jean-Paul Sartre, who famously wrote about the agonizing, heavy responsibility of human freedom in a godless universe, is engaging in this basic human concern.
So even Sartre is being religious in this sense.
Yes. Sartre is trying to orient himself to the ultimate order of things, even if he thinks that order is chaotic. That orientation, that questioning, is the basic good of religion.
So we have these 7 pillars: life, knowledge, play, aesthetic experience, friendship, practical reasonableness, and religion. Now here's where Finnis drops a concept that completely changed how I view my own schedule.
Oh, the hierarchy.
Yes, he argues that there is absolutely no objective hierarchy among these 7 goods. They're all equally fundamental.
This is a radical departure from many previous philosophers who tried to rank everything from best to worst. Finnis says you cannot objectively rank them because they are all irreducible aspects of a complete human person.
Right. Now, you individually can prioritize them in your own life based on your specific talents, your career, or your circumstances.
Of course, a university scholar obviously prioritizes the good of knowledge over the good of play.
And an Olympic athlete prioritizes play and physical life over reading dense history books.
Exactly. But the scholar cannot objectively look down from an ivory tower and say that reading a book is inherently, universally better for human flourishing than the athlete perfecting the physical limits of the human body.
None of these goods can be reduced to being merely a tool or an instrument for another.
And this equality among the goods leads to Finnis's total rejection of utilitarianism and hedonism.
because the hedonist argues that the only real good is pleasure.
Right.
And all these 7 things are just different ways to trigger dopamine in the brain. Pleasure is the point.
That's their argument. But Finnis demolishes this by referencing a famous thought experiment formulated by Robert Nozick, the experience machine.
Oh, I love this thought experiment. Let's really dive into the experience machine because it perfectly illustrates why the modern pursuit of just feeling good is so hollow.
It's very Matrix-like.
It is. Imagine it's like the Matrix. If I could offer you a pod to sleep in for the rest of your life, and I plug your brain into a supercomputer that gives you the flawless, simulated, subjective feeling of perfectly playing your favorite sport, or having the deepest, most loving friendship imaginable, or discovering the cure for cancer.
So you feel it perfectly.
Perfectly. Would you plug in? You would feel incredibly happy 100% of the time until you died.
Do you take the deal?
And the vast majority of people recoil at that offer. They wouldn't do it.
But why? If hedonism is true and pleasure is the only good, you should plug in immediately. It is maximum efficiency.
But we don't, because, as Finnis argues, we don't just want the feeling of doing these things. We want to actually do them. We want to actually be that person. There's a difference between having a dream that you are a hero and actually being a hero. The reality of the participation matters.
It matters deeply. The subjective emotional payoff is just a byproduct. It is not the goal itself. When you sacrifice a basic good for a mere simulation, or when you reduce a basic good entirely to its economic output, you are damaging yourself.
Which makes me want to turn to the listener right now. I want you to mentally pull up your own rational plan of life. Look at how you spent the last month.
That can be a tough mirror to look into.
It can. Look at these 7 goods: life, knowledge, play, aesthetic experience, friendship, practical reasonableness, and religion. Which of these are you aggressively prioritizing?
Often it's work, right?
Yeah, maybe you are grinding at your career prioritizing a warped version of practical reasonableness or wealth accumulation. But in doing so, are you completely neglecting play? Are you neglecting friendship?
Because according to this philosophical framework, hustle culture isn't just tiring, it is morally damaging.
Exactly. Neglecting any of these basic goods means you are willingly missing out on a fundamental aspect of what it means to be a fully actualized human being. You are willingly letting a pillar of your life crumble.
That is a stark realization. But of course, it immediately raises a practical problem. Life is remarkably short. We only have 24 hours in a day.
Right, we can't do it all.
We cannot actively, intensely pursue all 7 goods at maximum capacity all the time. If I am studying in the library to pursue knowledge, I am actively choosing not to be on the basketball court pursuing play.
Okay, so how do I choose without being paralyzed by indecision? And these 7 things that are naturally good for us, these pre-moral goods, but how do we transition from recognizing a good to actual moral duties?
How do we know what is right and wrong on a Tuesday afternoon?
Exactly.
This is where Finnis introduces what might be the most practical part of the entire book, the 9 requirements of practical reasonableness.
This is the methodological bridge.
It takes us from recognizing a basic good to acting morally in the real world. It is the precise toolkit for becoming what Aristotle called the phronimos.
The phronimos, the person of true practical wisdom. I always try to picture the phronimos. I used to think of a monk meditating on a mountain, perfectly serene.
That's a common image, but it's not quite right.
No, I think of the modern phronimos as that one friend you have, we all have one, who just seems to have their life together.
The grounded one.
Yeah. When a crisis hits, they don't panic. They know exactly what to say. They balance their work, their family, their hobbies, and they seem genuinely fulfilled. They aren't perfect, but their life is just clicking. How do we become that person? Let's unpack this toolkit, requirement by requirement.
The first requirement is straightforward but difficult. You must have a coherent plan of life.
So no drifting.
Right. You shouldn't just drift passively from impulse to impulse or from one shiny object to the next. You need a harmonious, overarching set of purposes that guide your daily actions.
Requirement 2 and 3 go together, and they are about checking our natural biases. No arbitrary preferences among values, and no arbitrary preferences among persons.
This is the bedrock of fundamental impartiality.
Let's break down how that works in practice, starting with values.
Regarding values, yes, you can focus on certain goods. The scholar focuses on knowledge, the athlete on play, but you cannot treat any basic value as intrinsically worthless.
You can't say, art is stupid and useless, therefore I will ban art. That is an arbitrary preference against a basic good.
Exactly. And regarding persons, This one can be tricky.
I find this one really tough because I obviously care more about my daughter than I care about a random stranger on the street.
Hmm?
Is that a violation of impartiality?
No, and Finnis addresses this. It is practically reasonable to prioritize yourself, your family, and your immediate dependents. You have a specific duty to them.
Oh, okay. That's a relief.
But you cannot do so arbitrarily. You must objectively recognize that the good of a stranger, their life, their health, their knowledge, is as objectively good and real as your own.
So I just can't be a sociopath about it.
Pretty much. You cannot operate with a ruthless, egoistic bias that says, my survival is the only thing that matters in the universe and everyone else is just a tool for my success.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about recognizing objective value outside of yourself. Requirements 4 and 5 deal with our psychology toward our goals. Detachment and commitment. This is a fascinating psychological balancing act.
It is the golden mean of action. You need to be committed to your projects. You can't be a flake, a drifter, who abandons every project the moment it gets difficult. That wastes your life.
But simultaneously, you need detachment.
Exactly. You cannot become so fanatically obsessed with a specific project, like getting a promotion or winning a specific election, that your life loses all meaning if it fails.
I see this constantly in modern career culture. The overcommitted person whose entire identity is tied up in becoming a partner at a law firm. If they don't get it, they have a complete psychological collapse, a midlife crisis, because they confused an instrumental project with a basic good.
That's a perfect example. Finnis is saying, hey, don't tie your soul to a specific project because the basic goods, knowledge, friendship, play are always there, waiting to be participated in through a million other projects, even if you get fired.
It is a safeguard against existential despair. Moving on. Requirement 6 is the limited relevance of consequences.
This basically says you should be efficient. Calculate consequences within reason.
Yeah.
Don't waste your resources or your opportunities.
But Requirement 6 immediately runs into Requirement 7, which is the absolute firewall of natural law theory.
Yes, the big one.
Requirement 7. Respect for every basic value in every act. You must never, ever choose to do an act which of itself does nothing but damage or impede a realization of any basic good.
This is the foundation of absolute human rights.
8th is the requirement to foster the common good of your communities, and 9th is the requirement to follow your conscience.
If you sincerely believe an act is wrong, after informing yourself, you must not do it. Why? Because to act against your conscience is to willingly fracture your own internal practical reasonableness.
Okay, I need to stop here and go back to Requirements 6 and 7, because here's where it gets really interesting. This brings us full circle to the very first scenario I posed at the start of this deep dive.
The utilitarian dilemma. The trolley problem.
The framing of the innocent man. I want to push back on Finnis using the strongest utilitarian argument I can muster.
Well, let's hear it.
Why can't I just do a ruthless cost-benefit analysis? If I can do one intrinsically bad thing, if I can lie to the public or torture a suspect or frame an innocent person to achieve a massive, undeniable net good to save 10 million other people, shouldn't I?
It's the classic dirty hands argument.
Right. Why shouldn't I prioritize the greatest good for the greatest number? It feels like cowardice to refuse to get my hands dirty to save the world.
This is where Finnis's takedown of consequentialism is so devastating and analytically rigorous. He doesn't just argue that utilitarianism feels icky or morally wrong. He argues that consequentialism is literally senseless.
Senseless, like logically impossible.
It is a mathematical and logical impossibility, and it all hinges on a concept called incommensurability.
Incommensurability, meaning things cannot be measured against each other on the same scale. Let's break this down mechanically.
Think about the basic goods we discussed. Life, knowledge, friendship, play. These goods are incommensurable. Trying to mathematically weigh the value of a deep, lifelong friendship against the value of discovering a new scientific truth, or the value of aesthetic beauty against the value of a human life, is a category error.
It's like trying to compare the mass of a heavy textbook to the length of a single page.
That's a great way to visualize it.
If I ask you, which is greater, the weight of this book or the length of this paper, you would look at me like I'm crazy. You can measure the mass in grams, you can measure the length in centimeters. Both are objective quantities, but they share no common metric. You cannot sum them up into a single net quantity.
Exactly. So when a utilitarian politician or philosopher says, weigh the consequences, calculate the net good, they're commanding you to do an impossible math problem.
You literally can't do it.
You literally cannot put 3 units of life and 5 units of friendship on a scale and see which side tips. Therefore, choosing to directly and deliberately damage a basic good like intentionally framing and killing an innocent person in order to achieve some supposed future net good is totally irrational.
You are arbitrarily deciding to destroy an absolute present good for a speculative future outcome that cannot actually be mathematically weighed against what you are destroying.
That is exactly the
That
point.
is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It means that whenever someone claims they did terrible things for the greater good, they aren't actually doing math. They are just using fake math to justify their own arbitrary preferences.
Because you cannot predict the infinite chain of consequences stretching into the future, and because the goods are incommensurable, any consequentialist calculus is just a smokescreen for power.
Precisely. And that is why the seventh requirement, never directly acting against a basic good, never treating a human being merely as a means to an end, holds absolute structural firmness.
Wow. Okay, so far we have focused heavily on the internal world. Your choices, your plan of life, your avoidance of utilitarian traps.
But human beings don't live in solitary confinement. We don't live in a vacuum. I can have my coherent life plan, I can be perfectly impartial, but the moment I step out my front door, there are millions of other people trying to execute their own life plans.
And that can lead to conflict.
Exactly. How do we keep this from turning into a chaotic, violent free-for-all? We have to talk about community coordination. That brings us to community, justice, and the common good.
To understand justice, you first must intimately understand the concept of community. Finnis outlines various types of unifying relationships.
Like what?
You have casual associations, like people on a bus. You have business partnerships based on mutual profit. You have play communities, like a sports league. And you have friendships. But these eventually scaled up and culminate in what classical philosophy calls the complete community.
Traditionally, this was the Greek polis, or the state.
Although Finnis makes a very astute modern observation here about the nation-state, doesn't he?
He does. He notes that in our highly interconnected modern world, the traditional nation-state is actually an incomplete community without robust international cooperation.
Because a single state can no longer independently secure health, safety, environmental protection, and economic stability entirely on its own. The horizon of the complete community has necessarily expanded.
Now, a vital, non-negotiable concept regarding community coordination is subsidiarity. This is a principle that I think is constantly violated by modern bureaucracy.
It gets ignored a lot.
Subsidiarity means that a central, higher-level authority, like a federal government or even a corporate headquarters, should not swallow up the functions and responsibilities of smaller, lower-level groups like families, local neighborhoods, or regional clubs.
And we must explain the mechanism of why. Why is subsidiarity so important? It's not just about administrative efficiency.
Right, I always think of it like this. Imagine the CEO of a massive multinational corporation insists on coming down to the mailroom every single day to personally lick and seal every single envelope.
That sounds exhausting for the CEO.
Not only is it a horrific waste of the CEO's time, it's incredibly inefficient, but think about what it does to the mailroom workers. It completely robs them of any agency, any responsibility, and any pride in their daily work.
You've turned human beings into passive, unthinking cogs.
Exactly. If a massive centralized government bureaucracy does everything for you, if it micromanages your neighborhood, your family, your local charities, it denies you the basic human good of authentic action and self-determination. Participating in smaller groups is how we exercise our practical reasonableness.
That is the exact mechanism. Subsidiarity protects the space for human agency. Now, with the community structure established, we can finally define what justice actually is.
Because it's not just a vague, warm feeling of fairness or equity.
No. Finnis identifies 3 strict, necessary elements for justice to exist. First, it must be other-directed. It is inherently about your relations with other people, not just your internal state.
Second, it involves duty. What is strictly owed to others is a matter of right, not just charity.
And third, it involves equality, or more accurately, proportionality.
And this breaks down into 2 major categories of justice that operate constantly in our laws, whether we realize it or not. Distributive justice and commutative justice. I want to make sure we nail concrete definitions of these.
Let's dive deeply into the nuances. Distributive justice deals with allocating the common stock of an enterprise.
Like the community pot of resources.
Exactly. This includes resources, opportunities, profits, but also burdens and roles. If a community has a budget or a tax burden, how is it distributed? It's not just a simplistic, everyone gets exactly the mathematically identical share.
No, that would be absurd in practice.
It is distributed based on relevant proportional criteria: need, function, capacity, or desert.
For example, giving a blind person a state-funded guide dog while giving a sighted person absolutely nothing is an incredibly unequal distribution of state resources.
Yeah.
But it is deeply profoundly just based on the criterion of need.
Exactly. And then you have commutative justice. This operates on a different axis. It deals with the relations and dealings between specific individual parties.
But it's more one-on-one.
It's about keeping promises, honoring contracts, and remedying inequalities that arise when one person wrongs another. If I steal your car, commutative justice demands I give it back or compensate you exactly for its value.
It doesn't matter if I am impoverished and you are a billionaire.
Right. That inequality would be a distributive question for the state to solve through taxes. But in the specific isolated dealing between you and me, I wronged you, and commutative justice demands I restore the balance.
It is so crucial to keep those distinct. And this is actually where we need to explain a major historical blunder. Finnis spends a good amount of time correcting a guy named Cardinal Cajetan. Who is this, and why does his mistake matter to us today?
It matters deeply because it shaped centuries of bad legal thinking. In the 16th century, Cardinal Cajetan was a highly influential commentator who summarized Thomas Aquinas. But Cajetan distorted this entire framework of justice.
How did he mess it up?
He created a highly rigid, symmetrical triadic schema. He declared that distributive justice is only what the state owes the citizen, commutative justice is only what citizens owe each other, and legal justice is only what the citizen owes the state.
Which, I admit, sounds very neat and tidy on a chalkboard.
It sounds neat, but it's a massive foundational blunder. It fundamentally changes how we view human responsibility. Cajetan's schema implies that only the government, only the state, is responsible for distributive justice.
But that's not true.
No. Finnis aggressively recovers the true fluid view. General justice is simply the overarching requirement to foster the common good. Anyone, at any level, can have duties of distributive justice.
Oh, I see.
If you are a parent deciding how to distribute your limited time and attention among your 3 children, you are exercising distributive justice. If you are a local manager deciding how to distribute the holiday bonus pool among your team based on their performance, you are exercising distributive justice. It should never be locked into a rigid state versus citizen binary.
To make this dance between commutative and distributive justice entirely concrete for the listener, let's look at a brilliant, real-world example Finnis provides. Bankruptcy law.
This is a perfect example.
Think about what happens when a business catastrophically fails. When a company goes under, it cannot pay its debts. From a pure commutative justice standpoint, the business owes its creditors every single penny it promised them in the contracts.
But the reality is the money literally doesn't exist anymore.
Exactly. If commutative justice was the only tool we had, the first creditor to sue would get all the remaining cash and everyone else would be ruined.
But that would destroy the common good.
Right. So bankruptcy law brilliantly steps in and forcibly shifts the legal frame. It stops looking at it as a commutative issue between isolated parties and turns it into a distributive justice issue.
It changes the rules of the game to save the system.
Yes. The law gathers up all the remaining assets of the failed business, declares them a common stock, and distributes them among all the creditors proportionally based on their class of debt. The law expertly dances between correcting private wrongs and fairly distributing a shared burden to prevent total societal collapse.
That is a perfect illustration. It shows how abstract theoretical concepts of justice are the actual invisible load-bearing walls of the laws we rely on every day.
So what does this all mean for us as individuals? We have established that we owe justice to our community. We must foster the common good. But how do we articulate what the community owes us?
How do we protect ourselves from being crushed by the machinery of the state?
Exactly. And who has the legitimate power to enforce these boundaries? That launches us into the realm of rights, authority, and the rule of law.
We hear the term human rights constantly in modern discourse. It's the lingua franca of international politics. Finnis makes the bold, clarifying claim that modern human rights are simply the contemporary vocabulary for classical natural rights.
They're the same thing.
And natural rights, in turn, are simply the requirements of justice we've been discussing, but looked at from the perspective of the individual receiving them. If I have a duty of justice not to harm you, you have a natural right not to be harmed. There are 2 sides of the exact same coin.
But rights often clash violently with this idea of the general welfare or the common good. We saw this constantly during recent global crises. A government will step up to a podium and say, we know you have a right to assemble or a right to run your business, but we need to suspend your rights for the common good. The crisis demands it.
And Finnis strongly, emphatically critiques this framing, particularly how it is clumsily worded in documents like the UN Declaration of Human Rights.
He takes issue with the UN Declaration.
He does. He argues that the common good is absolutely not an excuse or a trump card to limit rights. Rather, the robust protection of human rights is the common good.
Oh, wow, that flips it entirely.
Think about it. The common good is defined as the set of conditions that allows everyone in the community to flourish. Therefore, we do not limit rights for the sake of some nebulous, abstract general welfare. We only limit specific rights in order to protect other specific rights.
Can you give an everyday example of that?
Yeah.
Because it sounds a bit abstract.
Certainly. Let's say you have a right to property and a right to free expression. You decide to exercise those rights by blasting a massive sound system in your backyard at 3 a.m. every night.
My neighbors would hate me.
They would. The city passes a noise ordinance and limits your right to do that. They aren't doing it for an abstract common good. They are limiting your specific right to noise in order to protect your neighbor's specific competing right to health, sleep, and sanity. It is a balancing of rights under specific rubrics like public order or public health, not an eradication of rights by the state.
And it is absolutely vital here to reaffirm the seventh requirement of practical reasonableness we discussed earlier. Never choose directly against a basic value. Because of this unwavering rule, Finnis argues there are absolute claim rights, rights that can never be suspended no matter what the crisis is, no matter what the consequences are.
Yes, there is a bedrock. You have an absolute right not to be killed as a means to an end, which goes back to our innocent man scenario. You have an absolute right not to be positively lied to in situations where factual communication is expected, like from a judge or a teacher.
And you have an absolute right not to be condemned on false charges. You cannot violate these rights even to save the world, because, as we establish, doing so destroys the very moral fabric that makes the world worth saving in the first place.
But protecting these rights, maintaining the courts, and solving all these complex distributions requires something else. Authority. We need rulers.
Now, a very cynical, Hobbesian view of the world says we only need police and politicians and authority figures because human beings are inherently selfish, malicious, and evil. We need Leviathan to keep us from killing each other.
But Finnis points out a profound truth that changes how we view government. He argues that even in a hypothetical society of perfectly reasonable, sinless, highly intelligent angels, authority would still be absolutely necessary.
Wait, if they are sinless angels, why do they need a government?
Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't be committing crimes.
Because of coordination problems. Even angels need to know which side of the street to fly on to avoid mid-air collisions.
That's a funny image.
Let's say two incredibly brilliant, well-meaning angels want to build a hospital for the community. They might draw up two perfectly reasonable but completely different architectural plans. They aren't fighting out of malice or greed, they just have different visions.
But they cannot build two overlapping hospitals on the same plot of land. They need a way to decide.
So authority isn't just about punishing evil. It provides the exclusionary reason to pick a solution so the community can actually move forward. Authority breaks the deadlock of competing good ideas.
Exactly. And Finnis argues that the most effective, most just, most humanizing way for authority to coordinate society is through the rule of law. This is not just a catchphrase. It has specific requirements. Finnis outlines 8 desiderata, or desired features, of the rule of law.
Let's hit a few of the most important ones. Laws must be prospective, not retrospective. You cannot punish someone today for doing something that wasn't illegal yesterday. That is tyranny.
Laws must be clear and intelligible. They must not contradict each other.
They must be relatively stable over time so people can plan. They must actually be possible to comply with. You can't command the impossible. And critically, the officials enforcing the laws must actually be bound by them and follow them.
And the rule of law isn't just a bureaucratic checklist for judges to follow to keep their desks organized. It is a fundamental requirement of human dignity.
It really is.
If you live in a society where laws are unpredictable, where they are retroactive or kept secret, the government is treating you like an animal to be herded with a cattle prod. You can't plan. You live in terror.
The rule of law, by contrast, treats you as a responsible, rational agent. It provides the predictable landscape necessary for you to exercise your practical reasonableness and chart your own course in life.
Which brings a very sharp, very uncomfortable point into focus. The law is established on the books. The authorities are in place. The police are on the streets. But why, morally speaking, do you, the citizen, have a duty to follow a piece of paper signed by a politician you might not even like?
This is the crux of it all: obligation and the problem of unjust laws. Let's unpack the anatomy of obligation. Why do I stop at the red light when no one is around?
Finnis compares legal obligation to the moral mechanism of making a promise. When you make a promise to a friend, you voluntarily create a special frame of reference that gives the other person the valid right to your performance. You have bound yourself?
The law creates a massive societal frame of reference that operates similarly. Now, we must distinguish between two types of thought. In strictly legal thought, obligation is invariant. The law doesn't care if you are tired or if you don't feel like stopping at a red light today. The law demands compliance, period.
But in moral thought, legal obligation is a presumptive, defeasible reason for action.
Defeasible meaning it is a very, very strong reason to act, but it can, under extreme circumstances, be defeated or overridden by a higher moral duty.
Correct. And we have this moral duty because positive laws, the actual statutes written down in the law books, are derived from natural law. Natural law gives us the broad universal principle: do not harm your neighbor's life or property.
But that broad principle doesn't tell us how fast to drive. So positive law does the necessary practical work of determining the exact speed limit, say 25 miles per hour in a school zone, to prevent that harm. The legislature makes a specific, concrete determination from the general moral principle.
Okay, but what happens when the legislature gets it completely wrong? What happens when a law is corrupt or racist or inherently unjust?
This is a huge debate.
We have to tackle the famous slogan, often attributed to Augustine and heavily debated in Aquinas. Lex injusta non est. Lex, an unjust law, is not a law. I have always deeply struggled with this phrase.
It can sound very contradictory.
Because if a tyrannical dictator passes a horribly unjust law targeting a minority group, it clearly is a law. It's written in the book. The police will arrest you for breaking it. The judges will sentence you. It seems incredibly naive, almost childish, to cross your arms and say, well, it's unjust, so it's not a law.
It does sound naive if you take it completely literally. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Finnis provides a crucial, sophisticated refinement here. He says an unjust law is not a law in the focal sense.
Going back to our methodology from the very beginning, the central case, the pure water versus the mud.
Exactly. If the central focal case of law is an ordinance of reason directed to the common good, then an unjust law completely lacks that moral essence. It is a perversion of law. It is defective.
So it's the muddy water.
Yes, it still has the empirical trappings of legality, the cops with guns, the courts, the coercion, the paperwork, but it has lost its internal moral authority to bind your conscience. It is law in a marginalized, muddy sense.
So if a law is unjust, if it lacks moral authority, can I just ignore it? If the government passes an incredibly corrupt, unjust tax law designed just to line the pockets of the mayor, can I just tear up the tax bill and refuse to pay?
Finnis answers this very carefully, drawing heavily on classical texts to avoid promoting anarchy. He argues that while rulers lose the strict moral right to be obeyed when they act unjustly, you as a citizen might still have what he calls a collateral obligation to comply.
A collateral obligation, meaning an obligation that comes from the side, not from the law itself.
Yes. You don't obey the corrupt tax law because the law itself has moral weight. It doesn't. You obey it because breaking it publicly, resisting the police, and causing a massive scene might severely undermine the entire legal system.
So you're thinking about the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might encourage general anarchy, weaken the legitimate laws, and ultimately cause worse harm to the common good than the unjust tax itself. You are looking at the health of the entire societal system, not just the single bad statute.
Okay, but there has to be a limit to that. I can't just comply with every atrocity to keep the peace.
There is an absolute limit. If the unjust law demands that you actively commit an intrinsically evil act like murdering an innocent person or committing perjury to frame someone, you must refuse, absolutely, regardless of the systemic consequences.
So that violates Requirement 7.
Exactly. But for lesser systemic injustices, like a corrupt tax or a foolish regulation, the preservation of the overall legal order might require your begrudging, silent compliance.
That is a heavy, heavy calculation for an individual citizen to make. It shows how deeply intertwined our personal internal morality is with the massive external fabric of the state. We carry the weight of the system on our shoulders.
We do. And observing that weight pushes us, finally, to look beyond just the state. We have built this incredible, towering intellectual edifice over the last hour. We mapped the basic goods, the rules of practical reasonableness, the nature of community, justice, rights, authority, and law.
But as we step back and look at the fleeting nature of human life, the inescapable fact that empires eventually fall, all our friends die, and all our physical and legal achievements eventually crumble into dust, we are forced by our own intelligence to ask the ultimate question.
Is there a deeper point to all of this?
Right, does this invisible framework of human flourishing actually anchor to anything permanent? Which brings us to our final frontier, the ultimate horizon and the postscript.
Finnis doesn't shy away from this. He follows the logical chain all the way to its absolute metaphysical conclusion. He points out that the complex, interrelated order of the universe, and the startling fact that our human intelligence can actually grasp it and participate in it, points logically to an uncaused cause, a divine mind.
It's the ultimate why.
Yes, natural law is ultimately a participation in the eternal law of this divine mind. When we act with practical reasonableness, when we pursue truth, when we build just laws, we are participating in what Plato beautifully called the game of God. We are aligning our fleeting lives with the eternal order.
And it's so crucial to note here, for you listening, that Finnis is not presenting this as a religious dogma or an unthinking article of faith. He is presenting it as a rigorous philosophical necessity.
It's a logical deduction.
Right. If you act like a toddler and just keep asking why about the order of the universe and why about the objective validity of human goods, you eventually run out of physical biology or sociology to give you answers. To avoid absurdity, you logically arrive at an uncaused cause.
It provides the ultimate horizon of meaning for everything we've discussed. But before we conclude, I also want to touch on the 2011 postscript. Decades after publishing this foundational book, Finnis offered some vital reflections and corrections on his own work.
I always appreciate when brilliant minds admit they are still learning. Even the masters realize they missed a spot. What was his biggest self-critique?
In 1980, when he published the first edition, he listed the 9 requirements of practical reasonableness, but he admitted later that he failed to explicitly name the master principle that unifies all of them.
So what was the master principle?
In the postscript, he identifies this master moral principle. He calls it integral human fulfillment. This is the ultimate ideal of the flourishing of all human persons and all groups. Every requirement of practical reason, every just law, every act of distributive justice is ultimately guided by a will toward this integral human fulfillment.
He also makes a major update regarding the basic goods themselves.
Right. He does. Originally, he loosely grouped procreation and family under the general good of life. But upon decades of further reflection in the postscript, he explicitly separates marriage out as its own distinct, irreducibly basic human good.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just under life anymore.
Right. It is a unique form of committed, comprehensive union that cannot just be categorized away as mere biological reproduction or general friendship. It stands on its own as a pillar of human flourishing.
It really shows that the theory of natural law isn't a static, dead artifact in a museum. It is a living, breathing framework of practical reason that refines itself over time as we reflect more deeply on our own human nature.
Precisely. It is an ongoing project.
Okay, let's bring this vast expedition all together. What a journey this has been. We started by realizing that you cannot understand society, or law, or justice without first understanding what is actually good for human beings.
We identified those 7 basic goods: life, knowledge, play, aesthetic experience, friendship, practical reasonableness, and religion that make life worth living, none of which can be reduced to another.
We laid out the strict rules for choosing well without falling into the mathematical trap of utilitarianism. And we saw how those personal choices scale up. They scale up into community, into commutative and distributive justice, into authority, and into the rule of law.
And perhaps most importantly, we discovered that human rights aren't the enemy of the common good. They are its ultimate expression.
And the most important takeaway for you, the listener, is that this is not just abstract theory for academics. Every time you make a hard choice between competing priorities in your career, every time you sign a contract, every time you cast a vote or assess a political policy, you are engaging directly with the principles of natural law.
You are participating in that eternal order. You are either building up integral human fulfillment or you are tearing it down.
Finnis showed us that true law is just an extension of our own natural reason. It is the architecture of our flourishing. So I want to leave you with this to ponder. If a legal system requires your compliance to function, and that system begins to drift away from integral human fulfillment, At what point does your silent compliance stop being good citizenship and start becoming a violation of your own natural reason?
That is the ultimate question.
Remember that hospital analogy from the beginning? The one that confused locking doors with actual healing. Finnis has given us the ability to see past the locked doors. He's given us the tools to read the muddy waters ourselves and to perceive the invisible structures of human flourishing. How will you use that vision in your own life, your own community, your own choices? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly expansive deep dive into natural law and natural rights. Keep asking the big questions.